welcome to everybody and thank you for attending. My name's Greg Hodgson. I'm one of the Adobe education leaders and I'm really pleased to be hosting Ross Wallis. He's going to tell you all about who he is and what he does, but we're going to run through for about 40 or 50 minutes. And if you do have any questions, please ask. We'll try and, in the discussion area just below us, we'll try and respond as best we can. But we are going to hand over to Ross, who is going to take us on a journey about storytelling from a Homo sapien viewpoint, I believe. So, Ross, I will be here keeping an eye on the chat, but I will hand over to you.
Okay. Well, I think what I'm going to do is to mostly talk and show examples of work that my students have done and that I've done as well. I'm an art teacher in a secondary school in the United Kingdom, here in the southwest of England. And we work with a whole range of different digital devices. We do a lot of digital photography, animation, filmmaking, a lot of drawing and things like that as well. But I've been working on sort of trying to get at the essence of what it is that I do, rather than sort of like the surface. And it strikes me that it is really a lot about storytelling, whether it's images, whether it's words, or a combination of the two. What we're doing is storytelling. And I'm going to put this into the context of using Adobe mobile apps, which are a set of relatively recent apps that run on a whole variety of different mobile devices. They work on Chromebook, they work on Android, Apple, and they also work through web browsers. So you can use these Adobe mobile apps on just about any device you like. They also link and sync beautifully with the mainframe apps that you might have on your desktop, Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, those sort of things. So they link directly through. And I'm going to give you a talk in a moment that is going to be, it was created in Adobe Spark, which is one of these apps, though actually it's a combination of three apps. These are totally three apps, Adobe Photoshop Spark. There is one that works with images and text. There's one that works with images and voice between the images. And the third one is more sort of a graphic program for creating posters and that sort of thing. So let me see if I can share my screen. And I am going to open up
Yeah,
a Spark
perfect.
page here. Can you see that all right? So this is Spark page, and this is created on an iPad, though this works on a whole range of different devices, as I said. And it is really a little bit like PowerPoint, but so much more beautiful than PowerPoint because it is entirely web-based, which means that it's dynamic. Whatever device you view this on, whether it's through a browser or on a phone or on a tablet, whatever, it will scale to the size of the device you're looking at it. So it's not fixed, it's not paper-based. And I'm going to start by telling you a little story. And because I'm an art teacher, I'm going to start with a painting. I don't know whether you recognize this, but it was done by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and it is a painting in the pre-Raphaelite style, sort of mid to late Victorian. And it's actually a painting that he did of a character in a Dante poem. No link between Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Dante Alighieri, but it was a character called Beatrice. And the painting was actually, the model for this was Dante's wife. And at the time he painted this, she had already died. She was actually dead. He did this painting from quite a large number of drawings that he did of her over his lifetime. And I just find that phenomenal. And you've got all sorts of clues in here. You've got the dial here, which would sort of give you an idea of time. So this is a lifetime. You've got the bird here, which is sort of a bit like an angel. And you've got possibly another angel thing up here. So if you are looking at this in Victorian times, 130, 140 odd years ago, you would have been able to read this image as a story. Let me go into preview mode, and that might make it work a bit better. I just find it absolutely fascinating. We've sort of lost this ability to read images like this a little bit in the 21st century. And image making has just become so ubiquitous. There are images everywhere. We've all got cameras on our smartphones. We drive around. There are huge posters on hoardings. There's imagery and photography everywhere. And it's very, very difficult for us to think back to a time pre-photography. But this painting was created just on that cusp, not that long after photography had been invented. And I'm going to go on and show you an image by a photographer called Margaret Cameron, who was one of the very early photographers. And I love that link, look. And Cameron would have known Dante, Gabriel, Rossetti. They would have been in the same circles. She would probably have known Elizabeth Siddal. And she's actually creating a photograph here that is very much like a painting. And to begin with, the photographers, there wasn't a photographic language. That came later with photographers such as Edward Weston. If you go back 120, 130 years, photographers were sort of doing a lot of their imagery in relation to paintings. Look, this one's got an amazing title, Call, I Follow, Let Me Die. Again, very Victorian. It's basically an illustration from a poem by Alfred Tennyson. So they were basically creating photographs, but they were sort of more like paintings. They were sort of framing what they knew of photography in relation to what they already knew about painting. And what fascinates me is that I believe we're sort of going through this same process now with digital technology, where we're having to reevaluate another 100 odd years on what photography is, because digital media is sort of blurring those boundaries. This is an image taken by one of my students right at the very beginnings of phone photography. This was pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone. And she took this amazing self-portrait on this tiny little clamshell phone. And she actually turned it into a sepia toned image, into a monotone on an app on the phone. And that was, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, maybe. It completely blew me away. And again, the link I just love. It's really strong. It sort of ushered in this new age of digital painting almost, and going back to what photographers 100 odd years ago were doing. People like Edward Stryken, creating photographs that were sort of somewhere between photographs and paintings. They were called the pictorialists. And like I said, it sort of went out of fashion at the turn of the 20th century, and we've sort of completely forgotten about it. But a number of photographer artists were doing it. Here's a French photographer called Robert Demarchi in 1904, where that drawing pretty much is a painting. And then moving on here to something that I've created. This is done on an iPad, actually in a light class, where I'm sort of creating a painting that's half painting, half drawing. Greg, I'm getting quite a lot of noise interruption. Can you hear me still? Can you hear me still? Just trying to work out what's jumping around here. Can you still hear me there, Greg? Check. Greg, can you hear me? So here's another image. This is one created by me actually in a life draw class, which is straight drawing. This is using one of the Adobe mobile apps called Adobe Sketch. There are two of them, Adobe Sketch and Adobe Draw. One is a raster-based program. The other one is a vector-based program. So one will work directly with Illustrator. The other one, this one, Draw, is more of a little bit more like Photoshop. They both have layers. They both have all sorts of different drawing tools. The pencil in this app is absolutely gorgeous. It has a really very responsive pencil feel to it. And if you're working on an iPad with an Apple Pencil, it's even more beautiful. So I've done quite a number of drawings actually in the life room. This is another one created by one of my students in the life room, directly from life. But I use it as well with some of my younger students. So this is an image done by one of my Key Stage 3, that's a sort of 10, 11-year-old, maybe a 12-year-old. We went on a trip to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and the student produced this really very beautiful drawing in Adobe Sketch from one of the exhibits in the museum. And on that same day, we took them to the University Museum in Oxford, which is where there is the Dodo that inspired the famous Dodo in the Lewis Carroll Through the Looking Glass or Alice in Wonderland. So rather than just doing drawings of this Dodo or photographing the Dodo, what I got them to do was a combination of drawing and photograph. So they photographed the stuffed Dodo, brought it into an app, and then drew on top of it. And what you've got in both Adobe Sketch and Adobe Draw is the ability to bring a photographic layer in and then draw on top of it. And these, remember, these are 10, 11, 12-year-olds, around about that sort of age. And they're producing some really beautiful imagery, I believe, which sort of, I think, is so much better than them just producing photographs. There's another one. That's another one from the Ashmolean Museum, a student copying. And of course, there's an artist, Julian Opie, who's made an absolute fortune out of using Photoshop to make images. So this is a Julian Opie where I'm imagining this is done in Photoshop. In fact, I think that he ought to be giving some of his royalties to Adobe because he's made a career out of this. But it's actually really very simple to do, either in Adobe Draw or Adobe Sketch. This is one of my young students doing a drawing of themselves. And it's really fantastic to bring a photograph in and simply to trace on top of it. And if you're working on a tablet, you're working with a stylus or working with a finger. This guy got really addicted to it and spent hours sitting in the corner of the room drawing on top of this photograph of my art room.
Ross, can I just throw
really
a question in to you?
Yep.
Tara has,
Do,
yeah,
yes,
Tara's just
absolutely.
asking for a bit of clarification. Did you use an Apple Pencil or a stylus, or do your students? What tools do you guys use?
Um, I don't have Apple Pencils in school because that would be crazily expensive. But I do have a set of styluses that the students can use if they want to. But often I also encourage them just to work with their fingers in the way that Steve Jobs intended. He'd be absolutely turning in his grave now to know the direction it's gone with styluses because he was absolutely totally against them. But using a stylus, you can get very much more accurate. So this one, for example, was done using a Wacom stylus, which is just a cheap one, maybe 15, 20 pounds, somewhere around that. Not one that changes the thickness of the line in the way that the Apple Pencil does. But yes, I've got a set of styluses that the students use if they wish. So I'm going to go back to my storytelling and back to the Victorian age and talk a little bit now about montage. And again, this is something that was happening at the very beginning of photography over 100 years ago, when artists were first discovering photography and sort of wondering basically what it was that it was. Henry Pinch Robinson produced this amazing montage of images, which is very Victorian to our eyes now, very sort of sickly sentimental. And in fact, this figure on the left is very, very similar to the figure in Whistler's painting of his mother, which is called Whistler's Mother. So a lot of early photographers were really enjoying playing around with montage to create sort of story images in the way that painters would. And it totally went out of fashion at the turn of the 20th century when people like Ansel Adams and Edward Weston were sort of defining what photography was. And people like Henri Cartier-Bresson were talking about the decisive moment, the moment at which the shutter catches an image and that you look at through the viewfinder and you capture everything. They were taking photographs, whereas to my mind, this is sort of more like making photographs and making montages. And with the advent of apps like Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix, you can create some really quite stunning images by mixing, montaging lots of different imagery together and more or less painting with pixels. So that's an image there. I don't know how many photographs is in that. Half a dozen at least, all mixed together. And using what are called blending modes as well, where you're working in layers as you would be in Photoshop or Illustrator. And you can make those layers react in certain ways with each other by using different algorithms. So this is another one. Similar idea with the doll and the figure and using different blending modes to create. Basically, this is digital art. It's not photography and it's not really painting and drawing. It's somewhere in between the two. And this is one that I created, a self-portrait with fish. Let me go back in time again a little bit. The term montage was coined by this artist, who is George Grosz, and he was one of the Dada artists at the start of the 20th century. And he was one of a lot of European artists who went through the First World War, all the horrors and carnage of the First World War, and sort of decided that he couldn't sort of really paint anymore if painting was to do with beauty, with what he had seen. And he wanted to create an anti-art, and he wanted to bring himself out of the image making process. So he devised this way of making images by cutting up photographs, and he called it montage from the sort of the German word around sort of motor mechanic or sort of mechanical art, or a montor, the mechanic. And he created these beautiful images, and they're very simple to do, but also very powerful. This is an image that was created quite a number of years ago by one of my Year 9 students. That's a sort of 14-year-old. Here's another one that actually isn't digital. That was just created by taking a magazine and cutting it up with a pair of scissors. But it's sort of like the simplicity of it that I love. Here's another very famous montage artist, John Hartfield. He was another Dada artist, very well known to George Grosz. Where this image begins to make sense is if you decide that maybe these are Adolf Hitler's trousers, and you're getting a pretty direct reference there to what he thought about Adolf Hitler. And of course, bringing it more up to date, we've got Banksy in the UK doing a lot of photo montage. This one is using that very famous image from the Vietnam War. And I think Banksy is, again, he's probably an artist that wouldn't have existed without Photoshop, without the threshold button in Photoshop. So again, I think Adobe lawyers should go after him for some of that cash that he's making. This image is a montage created by one of my students last year, where she actually got a photograph and projected it onto a wall, and then put her image in front of the projected image and took another photograph. So that's a sort of montage done partly in real time, which I like. There's another one of hers. I just like this idea of playing around with the digital, with the real, with what's photographic, what's drawn. That image was totally done on an iPad using various photographs to create that beautiful sort of stained glass effect. And this was part of a series of images that one of my GCSE students created a couple of years ago. That's a 16-year-old. She did a whole series of these anthropomorphic animals that the surrealists would absolutely love. We often do quite a lot of games playing in the classroom as well. Just playing around with the material. This was a photograph that one of my Year 7s, my 10, 11-year-olds, took on a digital camera and then put through a little photo printer and then cut up and montaged and rephotographed and reprinted. So again, it's this idea of half digital, half real, half digital montage, half real montage. And in fact, there's an artist who's gaining a big reputation at the moment called John Staysacker, who does exactly that. He goes around the junk shops and antique shops in London, picks up old film posters and film postcards, particularly if he can pick up several of the same thing, then he will montage. That's an image of Audrey Hepburn, I believe. And here is something similar done by one of my older students. And again, the possibilities here of how you can sort of mix and match things digitally is quite extraordinary. So real face paint there, aligned with some digital painting, or using some lighting. If you go onto Tumblr or Pinterest, you'll find lots and lots of examples that you can steal to get some really neat ideas for the classroom. So that's a very simple Photoshop mix, just taking two images and putting them together, but also putting a little bit of transparency between the two layers there, the bottle layer and the face layer. So the face looks as if it's inside the bottle. And here's another one, a little bit more sophisticated, using different blending modes, Photoshop mix. Here's a game that we play. This actually was my one. This was my example that I used just for 5 minutes at the beginning of the class. I took a photograph of myself, and I took a photograph of a teaching assistant I had with me at the time, and then I combined the two, and then the students had to team up, and they had to produce a montage using bits of each other's faces, and that's a good fun little game to play. And here's another one created by a professional artist, Jasper James, but he seems to be quite an internet meme at the moment. So a lot of my students are producing their own Jasper James copies, and I think sometimes more successfully than he does. That's one of my GCSE students, my 16-year-olds, a couple of years back, creating a beautiful image. And this is a GCSE student from last year doing something similar. Last year, no, 2 years ago, again. Some beautiful images by Oscar. They're effective and also relatively simple to produce. Here's another idea. It's not a montage, but it's using two of the same image, two layers, identical layers, so duplicate a layer, and then turn parts of one image to monotone so that the color will just come through in one or two places. A lot of my students play around with that idea. Here's another one the same, only they've added a third layer in there, which they've put a blur onto, so that they've rubbed through, so some of it's blurred and some of it's colored and some of it's monotone. So they're getting to be sort of relatively sophisticated, but still using fairly simple techniques in Photoshop mix, Photoshop fix. And then this gorgeous image, I love this image. This was a collaboration that I did with another Adobe teacher called Nicole D'Alessio. And this was a game of what we call Photoshop Pingpong. In this version of the game, I sent her 5 or 6 of my photographs, and she put them together into an image. And then I sent her she sent me a few of her photographs, and I montaged them. And I sent her back a few more of mine, and she montaged them, and came up with some beautiful, beautiful results. This is another game. This one was with an artist in the UK, which was more of a game of ping pong. This is just one slide from a game where we sort of went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump out and see if I can show you my website. This is my own website. You're welcome to go and have a look. Under here, under collaboration, I've got the whole of that sequence of images that Nicole and I produced. Hang on. There's another beautiful one of hers done with photographs of mine. It's one of montage that I created with photographs of hers. But I've also rediscovered today a game that I played a long time ago with another AEL called Ian. And this was a proper game of Photoshop ping pong where it goes back and forth. So there's the first image that he sent me. I put a car in, put in some graffiti, I added some figures, he put in some posters. There's me in the background there, peeking my head through. And this is where it can get really exciting, sort of changing the scale, putting onto a games machine, and then turning that into a biscuit. It's taken a bite out of it, an X-ray. It's gone all sort of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it turns into Star Wars for some reason. We end up with Doctor Who. It's a terrific way of getting students engaged in learning the software while playing a game, because games playing is really addictive. It adds a sort of extra frisson to be sending the images back and forth. So that's Photoshop Ping Pong. And then I'm just going to finish here, I think, with some straight photographs taken by some of my sixth form students, where they've messed around with this idea of the physical and the digital. So that's a digital photograph, but she's put some flower on her model to take the photograph. And then this one, again with the flower, but adding a texture which is put on using a blending mode. And here's another one. This is one of my A-level students, one of my 18-year-olds from a couple of years ago. It's a third one of hers. And just to finish off, this is something else we've been doing recently, which sort of adds a totally different dimension to the storytelling. I've been doing a project with some refugees in a camp in northern Iraq. These are Yazidi people who have been completely displaced by the so-called IS group, and they're living in a refugee camp in northern Iraq. And we've been connecting up via the internet once a week for the past year, so that we can basically share our stories, that they can get an idea that we're connected. And we've been showing them photographs, they've been showing us photographs. So I'm going to just shut down that slideshow and go back into Greg just to see where we are.
We're good. We have...
It's about half an hour, Greg.
That's fantastic. So the first thing is to say, Ross, we do have more time if you want to share more. But I thought we ought to just, before we do that,
I've got some other stuff I could share.
Okay, but let's just take a pause and see if there are any questions. If anybody who is with us has got anything they want to ask, or they want to share any work that they again, folks, you have to do that through the discussion. You have to type that in the discussion down there. So just any general feedback would be interesting to know what you think about that. I think one of the to clarify, Ross, because I think quite a few folks are from the States, Ross is in what we call a secondary school, which is like a K-12 school. So are they like 10 years old to 18 years old, around that age?
Something around that. Yes, that's correct. Indeed.
So Ross, I have a question for you. Where do you get your inspiration from? If you're going back into school every day to drive this incredible creative response, how do you keep kind of topped up on not just energy, but in terms of enthusiasm for your subject?
I think one of the things that I do, I'm doing this, what's called a 365 project, a photograph every day. If you go onto my website, on my front page, I showcase this website called Blip Photo, which came from England originally, actually from Scotland. It came out of the Edinburgh Festival, I believe. And it was a guy sort of just telling his story day by day, image by image. And he developed some software in which to do it. And then he shared it with some friends, and they said, this is sort of fantastic and amazing. And they set it up. And it's basically, it's a bit like Flickr, a bit like Instagram maybe. It's a photo sharing site. It's used by a lot of professional photographers as well as amateurs. The constraint is that you're only allowed to upload one image a day, and that image has to have been created on that day. And I've been doing this Blip Photo for, I don't know, getting on for 7 years now, I think, without missing a day. I'm ever so proud. But what it does is it keeps me taking photographs every day, and it keeps me learning and looking. So when new software comes out, I jump on it and I play with it. And to me, it's all about playing, and also to an extent looking at what other people are doing. Looking at the other photographers in Blip Photo, but also looking at Pinterest and Tumblr and all sorts of other websites. And I shamelessly steal from my own students because they get some wicked ideas as well. So most of my inspiration comes through doing it myself, but I do it within that sort of game structure, whereby if I missed a day now of uploading my daily photograph after nearly 7 years, I would be absolutely gutted to have missed it. So that keeps the structure. But we were talking a little bit earlier on about, I was showing you some of the Photoshop ping pong I've been playing with other artists and other Adobe fans. And that's another sort of adds another bit of structure, because when you've sent off your images and you sort of waiting for them to come back, when they do and you think, wow, that's amazing, it sort of is a challenge. I can do that. I'll see what I can do and send it back. So there's a bit of fun sort of challenge, competition, along with the collaboration, which keeps you interested, keeps you going.
Thank you. Tara is asking a good question. What's the classroom setup? I think we're in for a treat, actually, because if we can persuade Ross to move the camera around, he might show us. But what's your classroom situation? Are you in a computer lab?
Can you see?
There we go. This is, and Ross, is this where people make the work?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So this is my digital studio. And I don't know whether you can see up in the ceiling there, I've got some big paper rolls, so we can bring those down very quickly to make a photo studio. I also have these round tables. You can just see one behind my head there. The legs fold up very quickly, so I can literally roll these tables out of my room or to the side within a couple of minutes. And somewhere off in the corner over there behind my head, that red and blue thing in the distance, there are a whole pile of bean bags. So I can very quickly completely clear my floor. We can have a ring of bean bags, and we can have students sat round on the bean bags with tablet computers in their laps, just drawing and working with mobile apps on the iPads. I've also got a set of laptop computers. So we've got all the Adobe suite. We can use the fully blown Photoshop or After Effects or Premiere or whatever on those devices, Illustrator. What I don't have anymore is desktop computers. I actually took all my desktops and took them down to music, where they use them for sort of very highly memory intensive music making programs, because I just get on better with the students going and fetching a laptop or an iPad. But what I'm doing more and more these days is trying to encourage them to use their own devices as well, because I'm working very much on this flipped classroom idea, where the work goes on as much as at home as it does in the classroom and in the holidays as well. Particularly with the photography, unless we sort of set up the paper here and the lights, there's not actually a lot in the classroom that you can photograph. So most of my students who are working with digital photography and filmmaking are producing the content out of the classroom and then bringing it back into the classroom to do the editing, and they're talking to me about it and maybe doing the research and that sort of stuff. So I'm sort of pretty well relying on them producing their own content. And in order to do that, obviously, they need to use their own devices. And I mean, there are issues. If students are coming in with their own smartphones, the temptation for them to be not on task is quite large. I have to try and make what I'm doing more exciting so that they are engaged. But if they're using their own devices, it gives them the power over it. It also means that all my students are working on their own individual programs of study. So I'm doing very, very little classroom teaching. I might show them demo an app, I might show them a bit of Photoshop, but there are so many tutorials online. We've got the Adobe EdXchange, which is absolutely fabulous for content, that really they can find out anything that they want to find out, and they can go and do a tutorial step by step if they wish to, or they can go and find inspiration. And that way, to my mind, it's much, much more creative than them being restrained and constrained by what I can show them. And again, linking into the earlier question as to what keeps me motivated, I think the primary thing that keeps me motivated is the creativity of my students, because they are coming in with some fantastic stuff.
Okay, couple more questions, Ross. Sorry.
So answer your question there, Tara. Yeah, that's all right. Almost all my own creative work, apart from the drawing, which I do on a tablet, almost all my creative photography is done on a smartphone, and using Adobe mobile apps and other photographic apps. So a lot of what you saw in that slideshow was created on smartphones. Susan, how does your school handle students that can't afford the needed devices? Well, I do have a set of devices up here, which they can use during lesson time. I guess I'm very fortunate in working in a school where the students generally do have access to this sort of equipment. I would probably have to approach things quite differently if I was working 20 or 30 miles north in one of the inner city schools in Bristol. Though generally in the UK, the funding for IT over the last 20 odd years has been phenomenal. And in fact, I'm working in a private school, but I look at some of the state schools quite jealously, because sometimes the kit they've got in their classrooms is better than what we've got.
There's a follow-up question about privacy.
Here's another Tara question. Yeah. Privacy is a big issue for everybody in school, I think. I used to run a sort of shared website, which was based on a WordPress blog that we called Face Paint. It was a bit like Facebook, but we sort of engineered it for our classroom. So I was in total control of it, and the students could log in. So that was a completely sort of enclosed private space, rather than using social media. We've since moved on from that, and we're using a software platform called Firefly, which is run for the whole school, not just within the art. And we can upload images onto Firefly, and they are closed within the school. Yes, you have to be very careful now about social media. So my face paint site got closed down because the school IT officers weren't totally in charge of it. But I'm getting on okay with Firefly. There's enough in there that we can use.
So Ross, is it possible, have you got another maybe 5 minutes? You could show us some more and then we'll finish off.
Yeah, I can give you another quick screen show.
Okay.
Indeed. If you can give me another share. Let's see how we're doing. Just have to get the screen out of the way so I can find it. Ooh,
there we go.
That one.
Ideal. Oh no.
That's it. Can you find it?
Yeah, it's good.
This was just a little demo I did a little while ago to demonstrate Adobe Spark page. It's taking a little while to load up here for some reason. There we go. This was just a demo, and I don't think I'll do a live demo at the moment, but I do encourage you to go and have a play. So this is another little game that we've played quite a lot in school, which is to take a famous story, a fairy story is ideal, a Brothers Grimm, something that everyone knows, and then either bring it up to date or change it somehow. And in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of this using Adobe Spark, Adobe Slate when it first came out. And I'll just say, okay, go and create an Adobe page or go and create an Adobe voice. And I want you to take a fairy story and I want you to update it somehow. So this was a demo of mine of Little Red Riding Hood brought into a steampunk world. And we took an art trip a year or so ago to New York. And a lot of the images in here were taken in New York on that art trip. So once upon a time, there was Little Red Riding Hood. Obviously, sitting in a subway, and she was bored. You can tell she was bored. So she decided to go and visit Granny on 44th and 5th. These are all done using Adobe Photoshop Mix. So here she is walking through Central Park when she's attacked by a big bad wolf. And you get the classic, what big teeth you've got. You can see the different ways in which Adobe Page can create and change images. What big eyes you've got. You can also create sort of little galleries of images like this. And put images in the background. So that's a very, very quick Slate. Sorry, Adobe Page. I mustn't say Slate because it's not Slate anymore. Created in Photoshop Mix. If you go on to the Adobe Ed Exchange, you'll find a couple of recordings that I've done where I've demonstrated Adobe Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix, and I've shown how we get those up into Adobe Voice and into Adobe Page. So go and have a look for me in the Adobe Ed Exchange, and you'll get that those hands-on tutorials. Yeah, sorry, Tara, it is a fox, not a wolf, but I don't think we have wolves in this country anymore. How do I approach getting them into non-art courses? I do a fair amount of collaboration with other subjects across the school, particularly with English and with music, with drama, where we do sort of combined projects. One of the real pains for me is the timetable, because things are so sort of rigidly fixed to time that it's quite difficult to do these collaborations. But I'm totally convinced that tools like Adobe Spark should be being used right across the school to tell the stories, because I'm here in art telling fairy stories, but you could use Spark to tell stories about your chemistry experiments or your biology or history, whatever. It's very, very powerful software for telling stories, and the stories are whatever the stories are. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, literature and pictures.
So, Ross, I think we're coming to the end of our time slot. So I'm just going to say a big thank you to you.
Yeah.
I've been
Here's
lucky
another
enough.
Tara question.
Oh, go on.
We could. Slate is just. Sorry, I keep saying that. Page. Adobe Spark Page and Adobe Spark Voice is so simple that the students don't need to be taught it. They get it straight away. Certainly, my 10, 11, 12-year-olds, they just are able to do it. So you don't have to teach it. So they can actually create a pretty good page or voice by the end of a lesson. I usually give them the week between lessons as well, so that they can go home and work on it. Because another beautiful thing about these apps is that they're web-based, so you can get to them from anywhere. If you have an Adobe ID, if you use your own Adobe ID, you can get to it from any device that you're using. What I often do in the classroom is to create an Adobe idea for a class, which does mean that they can, in theory, work on each other's pieces of work, which of course is ideal for Photoshop, Pingpong, and those sort of things. It's risky, but it also develops an idea that they're respecting what each other is doing. So yes, my suggestion is just go away and try it and experiment.
Ross, thank you very much. I think we're gonna pause, folks, and finish off. So if you've got any final questions, now's your chance to ask. But otherwise, it's a big virtual thank you from DLW and anybody else, and especially Ross from me. I know you're on holiday this week.
Yeah, we've lost you again, Greg. Log off, log back in.
I think, am I back? Did I come back then?
Yes, you're there. Great.
Okay. All right, so listen, I'm going to stop the recording. We will be here for another 2 minutes. And if there's any problems, any questions, we'll be around. Otherwise, I think Ross and I both need to go off and get a glass of wine or something to eat. So thank you very much for showing up, folks. And that was fantastic.